So let's say you found a skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey everybody, welcome to Dapper Reacts 70. I am here, of course, with Vishanti, who in fact is wearing feeders. Look at that, they're very lovely. Very lovely. Now that is, of course, because the last time Vishanti was here, y'all did a lot of super chats, and so Vishanti was able to pull those feathers out because, they're expensive. So
Indeed.
Yeah. They're
not as expensive as some, but, they're not something I can just casually drop money on.
All right, well, we are here today to talk about Dr. David Menton, and he gave this talk over at the Creation Museum Auditorium, I believe, about how evolution is baseless. Now, it's actually an interesting thing, because there are actually a few creationists out there, like Todd Woods, who have a very different take, and will actually say, oh yeah, no, there's tons of evidence for evolution. I just don't believe it, because I have a prior commitment, and I think that I can get enough evidence to show that evolution isn't true and my ideas are true. And I have a lot more respect for that, right? Because, at least you're actually acknowledging the state of the evidence, as opposed to, David Menton, who's just going to lie about it. But unfortunately, yeah, we're here to talk about David Menton. And I actually don't really talk about Todd Woods for that very reason, because he starts off with, yeah, I don't really have the evidence right now. It's like, oh okay, well, I can't fault you for that. Also, for $9.99, Rosina Apophenia Sufferer Keller says, let us hang our heads in a moment of silence to honor the late Snake-kun. Wait, did the snake die? Did we hear that the snake that bit Kent Hovind died? Okay, so for those of you who don't know, earlier this week, Kent Hovind was bitten twice by a juvenile timber rattlesnake, Crotalus horridus. And as far as I know, the snake isn't dead, but I don't actually know that for sure. So, yes. Okay, because I'm being asked, so, a couple days ago, or a few days ago, Kent Hovind was bitten twice by a rattlesnake. Or at least that's what I had heard. So I called Dinosaur Adventureland, and I spoke to their secretary, the person who answers the phone when you click for the reservations or the staying for a night booking section, right? Mostly because, I couldn't figure out what other extension to call. None of them were just if you just like to speak to somebody, okay. I thought maybe I could press the button for Kent, but I'm he's in the hospital. I think he has his phone with him. So anyway, and so I asked her about it, and, so the story that I got from the secretary over at Dinosaur Adventureland, or at least the woman who answered the phone, I guess I can't say for certain that it's the secretary, but whatever, was that there was an escapee from the reptile house, because apparently they have a reptile house there. I didn't really know that, but whatever. So yeah, a snake had gone missing from the reptile house. Now, Kent was over by their church building, their Genesis, or One Baptist Church, or whatever they're calling it. And he saw a snake slithering around, and he thought that that must be the escapee, because apparently Kent is such a fucking moron, I just blew the one F-bomb, that he thinks that any random snake crawling around must be the snake he's looking for, because that's how that works. So anyway, he picked it up and started carrying it back to the reptile house, at which point it bit him on the thumb. So he dropped it, and apparently it bit him again. Now, I did ask his secretary specifically whether he got out his stun gun to stun himself, because in some of his videos, he now, I want to be clear. I am not telling you that you should do this. I am reporting this as a bad thing to do, and I'm telling you to seek medical attention instead of this. But in some of his videos, he has recommended stunning yourself with a stun gun twice in an X pattern, because it has two leads on it. And that will apparently, according to him, fix the venom problem. Now, I want to point out, numerous studies have been done on this, and there is no evidence that this does anything. But according to Kent's secretary, he did try this on himself, and it didn't work, so he went to the hospital. And she said to me, I think our batteries aren't powerful enough.
No, that's not the problem. That's not why it didn't work.
Yes, I know. So Kent is now back from the hospital. He did a live stream since then. So for those of you who were invested in his survival, shall we say, now you have an answer to that question.
Reports of his passing have been greatly exaggerated.
Yes, I do not know for certain if the snake is okay. I didn't hear anything else about the snake being killed, and it sounds like it was a pretty small snake because it was described as a baby to me, which, I mean, I doubt it had just hatched the other day, but, you know, a baby rattlesnake, I'm thinking this thing's probably like a foot or two long, not like...
Oh, Rosina Keller says that Kent reported on his stream that he killed the snake, so...
Oh.
F's in the chat.
Well, that's disappointing. Well, Kent is now a snake murderer. Snake's own idiocy, his own idiocy. Well, okay, but Shipfish for $5 with their 20th super chat says, "Thank you for calling for info on the snake situation. Please keep us updated with a Godzilla. We'll drink for that Godzilla. Thank you very much."
See, I was telling some people like Kip that this was the perfect chance for, you know, Kent to prove that he's filled with the Holy Spirit, because like true Christians are immune from like poisons and venoms, so maybe he is a true Christian.
Yeah, he'll be the one true Christian. Because if there's one thing I know about Christians, it's that they like to call each other not real Christians. Although, if I'm being fair, I actually see that the most from Protestants, which is weird because historically the Catholics have been big on calling everyone else not real Christians. But in like the last few decades, they've toned that down a lot. I
think that's irony, and it's hilarious to me because they spent centuries being like, no, we're the real ones, and everyone else is the not real ones, and then now it's getting flipped back on them. I find that entertaining.
It is entertaining. Yeah. All right. Dear Irish textbook at all monger says Majkawij, which means well done by Slitherer, I guess.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So.
Cognitive trifurcation says, so what you're saying, Dapper, is that Kent bruised the serpent's head after it bruised his heel.
Or thumb, but yeah. I guess, Kent is himself a fulfillment of the Genesis. Was that 3? Is that in Genesis 3 that story happens?
Yeah, I think it's towards the end.
Okay. The Genesis 3 prophecy.
I've been bitten by a snake before.
I've never been bitten by a venomous snake. I've been bitten by non-venomous snakes, but not enough to ever draw blood. So.
Yeah, I mean, this was like back in middle school. It was from my science teacher's classroom, so obviously it wasn't, gonna be killing a bunch of kids, but it's one of those things that sounds like super cool, and I tell people like, oh my god, he got bit by a snake, and I'm like, it was just a little, tiny science class kind of thing. But
I've been bitten by a fair few garter snakes. So I used to catch them when I was back in Massachusetts with my adoptive human family, obviously, because they were all over the place.
This probably won't surprise many people, but because I am so nerdy, I read a lot of zoo books growing up, I watched a lot of National Geographic and things like that, so I knew how to behave if you had ever been bitten by a snake. So I very calmly, kept pressure, around the area, and just went to wash the area, soap and water, just very calmly. And my science teacher later on was like, hey, I'm really proud of you for not freaking out, and being a weirdo about it. I'm like, I pay attention in class, what can I say?
You're one of the good ones.
Yeah, the chat's freaking out right now about zoo books. So,
all right.
A blast from the past.
By the way, we are doing the drinking rules. I have some coffee here which has some added adult spiciness, if you will. By which I mean I just dumped some vodka in it, because that's what I have. I have some vodka. And we are here to take a look at...
Fits of Rage says that they've had more than one non-Christian ask what the difference is between Catholics and Christians, and I just literally thought back to Shogun, where, guys are arguing early on, and Yabushige's like, I don't have time for this Christian nonsense.
Yeah.
They don't care what the differences are. They're just like, I don't know why you're fighting. I don't care. Not relevant. Shut up. Go away.
All right, so we were here to talk about David Menton. I'm going to actually end up getting to that, even though we've been going for like 10 minutes without David Menton. And he is going to be telling us about how, apparently, according to him, the genetic code is like a piece of clothing, and the genes are like threads. Sorry. And then something about his analogy involves weaving the threads into cloth on a loom or something. The whole analogy makes very little sense. But, yeah, here we go.
How do you get a feather?
Vishanti, how do you get a feather?
Given a lot of super chat money?
There you go.
Well, I'm not
Nailed
being
it.
pessimistic. I think we'll learn more and more about this, but it's going to probably lie outside that little paltry 3 or 4% of the genome that we have a pretty good understanding now.
Okay, so what he is talking about, and we went over this a little bit last time, but I'll do a little refresher here, is that we have pretty good information that about 2 or so percent of the genome is protein coding. And a bit more of it is various kinds of regulatory things. The thing is, we actually know of a function for about 8% of the genome. So it's not clear to me where he's getting 3 or 4, but it's definitely not just the protein coding, because he's over that amount, but it's also not as much as we actually do know. So I really don't know where he's getting this number, but yeah, that's about how it breaks down. About 92% of your genome currently has no known function, the majority of which is known to not have a function, which is not the same statement, right? Not known to have function is one thing. Known to not have function is a much stronger claim, and we know that for most of that remaining, like, 92%. Of that 8%, about a quarter of it, so 2% total, is protein coding. The rest of it is all just regulatory things like enhancers, promoters, suppressors, all sorts of things like that. So, yeah. I'm just giving you a little bit more of a breakdown because I don't know where David Menton gets these numbers. Maybe he got them from Jeffrey Tompkins.
And get into what was once called by evolutionists junk DNA, which is the vast bulk of all the DNA.
It is still called that by evolutionists, if you will. You know, at some point I need to add the Darwin prayer to my list of videos I can play in here. So whenever anyone implies that Darwinism is a religion, I can just play the Our Darwin.
Yeah, you really should.
But I'll need to re-render it so that's in a wide format, because I have it at 1080 by 1920, so it can be a YouTube short. So I'll have to go back into that file and redo the framing and the aspect ratio and whatnot. Because, I mean, the framing is definitely designed for a portrait file. So, yeah, I'll have to reframe everything. Like some kind of a guy who does shots in the cinema, you know? Cinematography. Yeah. You know, look, there's a lot of overlap between real-life cinematography and, doing CGI stuff in Blender. If you don't know enough about real-life cinematography, you're not going to do a good job.
Which every creationist knew would definitely have a function, and of course it does.
Except it doesn't, all right? And we're going to, if he doesn't go more into depth so that we can have something to talk about, I'll then go more in depth on my own.
But this whole idea of life being based in the back of crystals that we heard...
Okay, I guess he's not going to. Great. He's just going to mention junk DNA and then move on, which is pretty dumb, so I'm going to take a drink. Also, I just need some coffee and vodka. Okay, so junk DNA and function. So there's a few things. One of the things is that in that 92 or so percent of your genome that is not known to be functional, the vast majority of it is known to be sequence unconstrained, or to not be sequence constrained, whichever way you want to say that. Which might make you wonder, well, what does sequence constraint mean? Well, think about a protein that you need to live, right? One of my go-tos is hemoglobin, because most people know that hemoglobin is the protein that carries oxygen around in your blood. And Vishanti, what happens if you don't have oxygen?
Do you want to not be alive?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you die if you don't have enough oxygen. Oh, for $2, Savage, 1080 radiometric pixels, Cobra, says, evolution, evolution undesigned proponentist. Nice. I love C-design proponentists. So great.
It's so good. That's great.
So you have this hemoglobin, and you have a gene, right, that codes for this protein. Okay, we get that. Now, I think it's pretty clear to everyone that there are some mutations that could break the hemoglobin gene so badly that it just wouldn't function. For instance, if a big chunk of it just got deleted, and now you just don't have the hemoglobin gene anymore, right? Or if there's a frameshift mutation that causes the start codon to no longer function because the reading frame isn't aligned with the start codon. Now you just don't have anything there, right? I mean, technically you still have the sequence, but obviously it's not going to work because of this frameshift mutation. Okay. Well, that would be a problem, right? That would be an immediately fatal thing, which means that it's sequence constrained. There are a number of sequences which can work to produce functional hemoglobin, and we know that because there are actually thousands of variation in human hemoglobin, right? Where the actual amino acid sequence is different. There are thousands of versions. However, we know that it can't be literally anything. And one of the reasons that we can see this is that when you compare certain regions of the genome that are known to be non-sequence constrained with regions that we suspect are, you can actually see a slower mutation accumulation rate. So that's one of the reasons why when you're doing like, you ever do like that 23andMe or Ancestry.com DNA test, they look at non-functional regions because those accumulate mutations faster. So they're more useful for tracking where people's ancestors are. Because if you try to track it with things like protein coding regions that are sequence constrained, well, some of those mutations are going to be erased just by natural selection. So that's less useful for that one purpose. And so since we know that the majority of the genome can literally say anything, it's hard to say how it could possibly be functional. Because what function have we identified that is not sequence dependent? The answer is none. Every single function that has ever been identified, except by the ENCODE definition, we're going to talk about that in a second, has had sequence constraint. You have to have certain sequences to be a promoter. You have to have certain sequences to be like a regulatory region. You have to have certain sequences to code for genes, all that stuff. So if it's sequence constrained, we have very good reason to think that it is functional, and we have never even been able to come up with a function beyond just existing for sequence constrained regions. Further, some of the things that we know about the genome is that certain parts of the genome are characteristically bound up in what's called heterochromatin. So what heterochromatin is, it's part of your chromosome, hence the name chromatin, right? But it's tightly bound up by things like various proteins that attach methylation functional groups to the DNA that tightly winds it around that. And what that does is it makes it impossible for transcriptase to get into that DNA and turn it into RNA, which can then go on to go do things, right? So basically, enzymes are restricted from interacting with this heterochromatin, which means it functionally is physically impossible for it to interact in any significant way with the rest of the cell. So if it's locked up in a safe, it's probably not doing a whole lot right now. And we also have knockout tests, where we've taken things that are relatively close related to humans, usually rodents, because rodents are the next closest, well, rodents plus lagomorphs, right, like bunnies and hares and whatnot. That group of animals is the closest relatives to primates among extant organisms. So they're a good model organism for primates, when primate research would be difficult or ethically questionable. And so what people have done is, with these knockout tests, is just remove huge chunks of rodent genomes, and then noticed that the resulting embryos that are developed to term not only come to term as healthy adults, but can then go on to reproduce and produce healthy babies with other wild type or, whatever domesticated stock that you started with before you did the knockout. So it's not just that we don't know what the function is for this 92% of the genome. For most of it, we know that there isn't a function. And for the remaining part of it, because it doesn't seem to be sequence constrained, there is no even theoretically possible function that has ever been proposed. Now, does that mean we won't find function for any of the rest of the genome that we don't currently have knowledge of? No, of course it doesn't mean that. There'll probably be a few things here and there that we find function for. Great. But there is absolutely no sense in which it is trending towards 100% or even going over 50%. We might be able to squeak out like another 2 or 3% of functionality, and then maybe get to like an 89% functional human genome. Sorry that I went on such a long rant there. It's just that apparently
I just kind of tuned out.
Well, he was just going to go
that's
on.
Because I've watched Dr. Dan's video
Yes.
from this week where he talks about that, so I'm like, okay.
Yeah, but I was going to respond to what Dave was saying about junk DNA, but apparently he's just moving on from junk DNA, which is lame because I titled this stream Junk About Junk DNA specifically because I knew the next topic he was saying was junk DNA, and then I didn't know he was just going to skip over it.
You could just argue with somebody that was in the chat talking about how there's no junk DNA.
Oh, who was that?
To bleed that out. So somebody named Jason who said no such thing as junk DNA just because they don't understand it, they write it off. That's why we have wars.
Oh, yes, Jason Urin. Yep. Well, Jason, I'll tell you what. If you would like to set up a discussion about junk DNA, please email me It's dapper.dinosaur.yt at google.com. You can also find it if you go to my channel page, go to the About Me section. There is a for business purposes only email. Setting up a discussion about junk DNA is absolutely a business purpose, so you are welcome to use that email for that purpose. And we can see what we can do.
Hello, Landon Knoll.
Hey, Landon. How you doing, man? I'm going to be talking with Landon not this Saturday, but next Saturday. Yeah.
In that movie is...
I thought that he didn't like Snowflakes because AIG is a fairly right-wing organization.
Is really part of where evolution's going?
Yeah, but they still complain about snowflakes.
It's all projection.
True.
I love it.
Also, I feel like that the top middle snowflake has a little YouTube play button in the middle.
Because you see, the evolutionist looks at crystals and says, look, here's hydrogen and oxygen, and one would never have been able to determine in advance without actually seeing it, that when these atoms, hydrogen and oxygen, interact together under certain conditions in the atmosphere and changes in temperature and certain humidity and what have you, they can form these crystals. And these crystals, if you notice, all tend to be six-sided or six-cornered. Some of them have absolutely perfect symmetry.
I'm not sure where he's going with this, but I do want to point out that, in fact, snowflake formation is an example of lowering entropy in a system at the expense of increasing entropy in the entire wider universe, right? Snowflakes have lower entropy as snowflakes than they did as a cloud of water vapor. So, yeah, about that whole, like, oh, how can we have the second law of thermodynamics overcome? It's like, well, you're showing me 6 examples among trillions, because I don't know if you know, but there's a lot of snowflakes that have ever been formed. Of that exact thing happening. Now, is this as complex or cool as life? Well, I would argue no. Definitely not as complex. It definitely doesn't have many parts. But it is definitely an example of order coming from relative disorder being the opposite of what you normally think of with entropy, in which lower entropy actually means... anyway, where entropy goes down. Did you
also watch Reason to Doubt's video on entropy this week?
I'm not sure. I would have to double check. I usually keep track of Reason to Doubt stuff, so probably. Donald Jaramillo for $2 says, AIG is a satchel of lingams. All right, we'll take a drink for that. Thank you very much. And of course, it is true. That reminds me, I did watch a video of someone wandering around the reshot structure in the Sahara and picking up some oblong stone and being like, I think this is a lingam, like from India. Like, okay, sure, buddy.
I was cringing out of my skin watching that. It was on Andrew White's channel where he was talking about people wandering through the reshot, but it was like people who aren't archaeologists disturbing archaeological sites and just picking up artifacts and hand axes and pottery and just moving them around or selling them. Like,
yep.
What are you doing? You are literally...
One person seemed to think a hand axe was a spear tip. It's just like, oh no. Come on, man.
Yeah, even Andrew White was like, no?
Arthur Amps, who's been a member for 11 months, is at the annual level, says, how do creationists explain the existence of viruses? Are there, quote, kinds of viruses? Where are there viruses in Eden? You had it. I'm going to go with, were there viruses in Eden or Noah's Ark? Did sin make them? So I actually don't know.
Where are there viruses in Eden? Like, where are they in the text?
Oh, okay. Where are there viruses? Yeah, so they're definitely not mentioned in the text. The only person I've actually known who's tried to address this is, oddly enough, Donnie Badinsky. And his claim is that viruses were originally essentially symbiotic with living organisms and were a method of, like, allowing organisms to gain new functions as a result of aspects of the viral genome.
But mutations handle that already, right?
Yeah, it's very confusing, and I don't think he has any evidence for it. I think the most he can do is say, well, this is an explanation that, if true, would put it in line with my theology, so that's my explanation.
Big if true.
Yeah, that's as far as I've ever found any creations going into viruses. I suppose some of them could say that viruses were just an effect of the fall, and that God just created a bunch of, FU tiny little organisms right at the fall to
But he
make people
couldn't
sick.
he couldn't have started another act of creation because the text says that he was done creating everything by the end of day 6.
Look, they're going to have to reinterpret some of that text no matter what. So that's just one of the parts that they're going to reinterpret.
Why let the text get in the way? My theology comes first.
I mean, that's the thing. That is what young Earth creationists do.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, oh, we're all about Genesis, except that, well, you have to ignore parts of Genesis to accept young Earth creationism as young Earth creationists accept it. So, no, they're not. They're about the parts that they want to be about. And here's the thing, right? That's going to be true for the Bible no matter what. If you want to use the Bible as your source for proof text for your beliefs, because the Bible contradicts itself on most points, to some degree at least, you're going to have to pick and choose. And everyone does it. The difference is some people pretend that they don't. Like young Earth creationists.
Of them have little defects and are not perfect symmetry. And evolutionists are looking for things like this to produce the order and the structure that's
Dapper.
missing.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Be honest.
Okay.
Are snowflakes alive? Do they have baby snowflakes?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Weird. Weird that he would use an example of something that's not like alive, doesn't have respiration, doesn't have metabolism.
To be fair, I am not positive he's doing that. I think he's just using these as an example of crystals. Well, let him cook a little bit.
Okay.
Just from coding for proteins. Here's that funny line, you've probably all seen this.
No, no.
Well, so what he's trying to do is he's trying to explain part of an aspect of abiogenesis, which is to say that certain biomolecules might have used crystalline substrates in the form of various minerals in order to basically guide their geometric formation, essentially, right? So that in certain kinds of clay, say, you can get an enantiomeric excess in your amino acid mixture, which means that you get more left or right-handed when they're forming on this clay as a result of the crystal structure. He's trying very desperately to explain that, but I think the problem is he doesn't understand the point of that, and so he can't give an analogy that makes sense of that, and so it's not clear even what he's trying to say. Because the thing is, fundamentally, David Menton has no idea what he's talking about, right? David Menton seems to have been a reasonably good human anatomist, which is an important thing to do. He taught in medical schools, he taught human anatomy, I'm sure he was fine at it. Everything I've seen indicates that he has a pretty good grasp on what parts are where in the human body. Great. But every time he talks about anything else, it's very evident he has no idea what he's talking about, and he's just riding on his human anatomy knowledge to sound like he's smart. And so I think that's what this was. I think this is an extremely muddled attempt to explain the idea of mineral substrates in abiogenesis.
This is from the movie Expelled, where Ben Stein is talking to Michael Roos, asking about...
Hey, here's a fun thing about Expelled. Basically, every non-Christian interviewed in that movie has said that their interview was taken out of context and dishonestly edited.
Wow.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Right?
How did living cells begin? Oh, I love this description from Michael Roos.
How do we get from an inorganic world?
Oh.
Did you turn up the volume, my guy?
I didn't tell him to hook up the sound.
No, he didn't even tell them the sound needed to be piped through to the audience. Jeez. You know what? I'm going to take a drink for Dapper's a professional, except it's Menton's a professional.
Yucks can't tech.
Mm-hmm. EX and Flurfs united in their almost complete inability to tech.
Mm-hmm.
Forgot about that. As you know, he says it probably formed on the backs of crystals. Have you seen this video?
No, I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've seen Expelled. I don't know, whatever.
Probably formed in the backs of crystals. So Ben Stein says, that's fascinating. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Okay, so here's the thing, though. Ben Stein isn't someone who knows about, like, organic chemistry or anything like that. Like, he knows a fair bit of trivia, which was the whole point of Win Ben Stein's money. I'm not going to say that he's an idiot, but the thing is, he is absolutely not equipped. Neither am I, really, to understand the nuances of, like, system chemistry and, like, crystalline substrates and, you know, abiotic amino acid formation and synthesis of RNA and prebiotically relevant methods and all this stuff, right? So for Ben Stein to ask someone who's an origin of life researcher to expand on that, there's only so much he can say while Ben Stein is going to still be able to understand it without, having Ben Stein sit through 3 or 4 semesters of various complex chemistry classes. It's sort of like if you wanted to know oh, hey, how does the Google search engine work? I can give you a basic description, but if you wanted me to expand on that and get into the programming, I don't think I could, and I don't think most of you would understand it either. In fact, I happen to know most people at Google don't really understand it. However, I will say this. Here's a PSA. If you're currently using Google Chrome, go to your settings, go to search engines. There's a little arrow pointing to the right. Click it. It'll bring up it'll expand that menu. There's a little site search button with an ad. Click that. Name it whatever you want, nickname it whatever you want. Copy the URL from your Google search engine, paste it onto that search engine, but then at the end, add ampersand, little and sign,
Oh, yeah.
UDM, that's Uniform Delta Mike, equals 14. And then make that your default search engine. And then when you just type things into the little search bar at the top of your screen, it will remove all of the sponsored links as well as all the AI responses from Google. So,
the Konami code.
Yep. That is now my default search engine, is that custom one where I just added and UDM equals 14 to the end. And I don't have to see any of that AI nonsense or any of those reams of sponsored ads or sponsored links or whatever. All right, we have another super chat. Let's see, we have 2 actually, looks like. Savage 1080 radiometric pixels Cobra for $5 says, if this presentation was intelligently designed, you'd think the tech would work by now. And Left-Handed Jedi for $5 says, if there was a god and he created humans, why not give human DNA a right-hand twist? I mean, it would certainly be good evidence against common design, right? But then again, creationists might argue, well, then that would be the mark of a second designer or something. So I don't know exactly. Philipunk half dog half canine for $5 says, Ben Stein also holds several wildly bigoted beliefs about LGBT plus people. Happy Pride, everybody. Happy Pride, and yeah, that doesn't surprise me in the least. Because Ben Stein seems like he's on the religious right. I actually don't know what religion he belongs to. I mean, I suspect it's Christian, but it also wouldn't...
Wait, who? Say again?
Ben Stein?
No, he's Jewish.
He's Jewish? Alright, but he's going to be sort of in that, that group of Jews that
Yeah, he's like the Prager before Prager became a thing.
Yeah, okay. So, aligned with religious right Christians on a whole bunch of, ideological and moral, ethical areas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Young Lady Novelist with their 5th super chat says for $4.99, cheers being able to catch a live show on my birthday. Well, happy birthday! Also, here goes the obligatory AIG as a satchel of Kent Hovind's. Nice, take a drink for that. Awesome. I really do feel bad that Kent killed that snake. It was Kent's fault that he got bit. Kent didn't have to pick that snake up. And, yeah, feel bad about that. Oh well. Maybe later we can have a memorial stream for the little snake. Send flowers. Ooh, we could do that. Send flowers to Dinosaur Adventureland to the snake.
In memory of the snake.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I don't know what the legality is of sending flowers in memory of the snake to Dinosaur Adventureland. So I'm not suggesting people do it. I'm just suggesting that it would be funny if it happened.
And he says, I told you, on the backs of crystals. And basically he was telling everything he knew.
I don't believe
he
that
just
for
left
a
it
second.
playing while he's talking. Dude.
Yeah.
That somehow living things would form on the backs of crystals.
All right, Nether Six Hero, who's been a member for 6 months, says AIG is a bag of dicks. The Dapper is good. Thank you very much. And there were channel emojis being used there, so we'll take a drink for that. All right.
Well, what does he mean by that? There is, out of the many, many theories trying to explain how life could have evolved, and technically they're really not theories, one is the clay hypothesis. It's not...
Okay. Here, Irish Textbook et al. Monger says, should we send a set of flowers for the snake and then a pack of AIG gummies for Kent? I am not advocating that you do this. If you decide to do that, it's on you. However, let me know if you do.
Named after a person called clay. It's named after clay. Crystals that occur in clay. Back in 1985, Graham Cairn Smith was one of the first to propose that maybe we could begin to get some of the order and complexity necessary for life by having the early organic crystal or organic compounds attached to crystals. And because of
Mr. Cliff, who's been a member for 13 months and is at the annual level, says, which hominins were voyeuristic? So, I know that that's probably a joke question, but there's actually some interesting science that can go into this. One of which is there have been studies on like non-ape monkeys, right? Like old world monkeys, where they do things like provide options for rewards for particular behaviors, right? Because like when you're training a monkey to do a behavior, you give it a reward when it does the thing. And normally rewards for monkeys in training sessions are things like fruits and vegetables, right? Like you give them some cucumbers or a grape or something like that. But it has been found that in some circumstances, male monkeys will prefer, as a reward, time looking at images of the reproductive organs of female monkeys. Which tells me that basically the voyeuristic impulse that humans have has been a part of human ancestry since long before apes diverged from other monkeys, and that it is probably something that has been around for tens of millions of years. So my guess is that all of the hominins were voyeuristic to a certain degree, because it just seems to be such a widespread behavior, right? Like if even monkeys as like little related to humans as things like macaques will look at what in human terms would just be pornography, and will do that in preference in some cases to other rewards. I mean, yeah, that impulse has got to have been part of human ancestry since forever ago. Now, can I absolutely demonstrate this? No. Do I have direct physical evidence of any hominins having like voyeuristic tendencies? No. But I would be shocked if all of them didn't have those tendencies. Donald Jaramillo for $2 says, Kent is the Christy Gnome of AIG. Oh, goodness, with a Mothra. Yeah, we'll take a drink. Yeah, it was interesting to see how quickly that woman's whole career just kind of imploded on itself. In a self-own, she just didn't have to put the story about her killing her animals in that book. She could have just not. Like, did you know about this story before it came out in like previews for her book? Because I sure didn't. All right, and for £2, Mr. Cliff says, Peking Man. Yeah, Peking Man is actually just a Homo erectus. And so every once in a while you get creationists who say things like, oh yeah, we don't even have the fossils for Peking Man. It's like, well, I mean, yeah, the original fossils were lost during World War II after they were put on a train in China and sent off west with, fingers crossed. Turns out it didn't work out too well. But, like, there are other fossils from that site, and it was a Homo erectus. We have lots of Homo erectus fossils. In fact, we even have Homo erectus fossils from other sites in East Asia. So, like, I don't understand when the creationists are like, well, that's just gone. We don't even have it anymore. It's like, you're only technically true. I just don't know what the point that you're trying to make is. Noromdaputs for $5 says, that checks out. I've heard tales of getting pandas to mate by showing them videos of other pandas mating. Yeah, well, one thing, pandas are really bad at mating, apparently. Apparently they
captivity. In captivity.
Yeah, fair. But, yeah, like, poor pandas. Poor pandas.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to make it, guys. I think pandas are going to go extinct in the
wild.
In
captivity. They don't do a lot of that stuff very well in captivity. They're fine in the wild. Like, yeah, they're a little simple, but...
Well, they're fine in the wild when they find each other. But their habitat is so fragmented.
All the memes that people are like, oh, they don't know how to do this stuff without people, like, that's in captivity. That's not...
Right. But the problem is that in the wild, they have other problems, like habitat fragmentation. Yeah. Which means that they're not doing it in the wild much either. So...
Yeah.
The regularity in the crystals, it might begin to impose some order.
No, it's not that it might begin to. It's that people have actually done experiments where they do things like they conduct experiments with prebiotically relevant conditions in order to see if the substrate matters for things like an enantiomeric excess. Now, like I said, amino acids come in two versions, right? Each one comes in two versions. L and R for left and right. And so basically it's the same thing as your hands, right? If you hold your hands up, you'll notice that they have the same basic shape, right? They have a thumb, and then they have the pointer finger, the middle finger, the ring finger, and the pinky finger, and they both follow that pattern. But you'll also notice that they're not identical. They're mirrored images of each other. If you hold your right hand up to a mirror, you get something that looks like your left hand, and vice versa. Amino acids are like this too, right? They have a particular shape that is not completely symmetrical, which means it can be mirrored. And life uses primarily one version of the protein, or of the amino acids, and it doesn't use the other one. And so to get a collection of amino acids that would be relevant for abiogenesis, you have to find a way for there to be an excess, at the very least, if not a pure solution of one of those amino acids. But the thing is that most of the ways that amino acids form, they form these two versions are called isomers. They form these two isomers at equal rates. And so there are numerous possibilities for how you get an excess of either L or R amino acids. One of them that has been experimentally verified is that these reactions might happen on various substrates of minerals. A particular kind of clay, I don't remember which kind off the top of my head, is one of these. And so the question isn't just that you're going to have clay and therefore you're going to get, like, an amoeba popping out. The question is, like, how do you get these amino acids so that they can then go on to do things like allow ribozymes, little RNA bits that work like the most basic version of a ribosome, to then create useful proteins and facilitate the reproduction of the ribozymes in the first place. And this is part of that answer. It is not a question about how you get an entire cell. And that's one of the problems, right? Because abiogenesis research, or origin of life research, isn't really at the point where we're doing, well, how did the first cell really come about completely? We're still working on how did various biomolecules come about in plausible ways. And how many plausible ways were there? How many of them can be reasonably fit into the history of the Earth? And that's an open question. Like, there's a lot of research to be done about this. But there's no indication that it's impossible. And frankly, calling this like an idea about the origin of life, it's kind of like saying, how did you build a car? And then, or saying, sorry, it's kind of like pointing out like that this documentary about how you smelt iron ore into steel doesn't explain how you build a car. Well, that's true. That's true. It doesn't. It does tell you how you get an important part of a car, though. But yeah, you're right. It's not on its own how you get a car. It takes a lot more steps.
And structure. Moreover, crystals were found to sort of mutate, as it were, to vary a little bit. Not all the crystals are exactly the same. And it was believed that these crystals could pass these changes on to their offspring crystals.
I have no idea what he's talking about. We're going to take a drink. Crystals don't have offspring crystals. However, if something is forming on a crystalline substrate, and the geometry of the crystal is important for the formation of the chemical product that is being formed on the crystal substrate, then an irregularity in the crystal matrix will result in an irregularity in the geometric formation of the resulting product. So, I mean, that is true, but that doesn't mean that you're getting baby crystals out of it. Can you see what I mean when I say that David Menton has absolutely no idea what he's talking about? Like, I don't understand this whole topic very well. But, I mean, I understand it enough to be coherent on it, whereas he doesn't seem to do that. He can't even speak coherently about this.
Specifically, complex organic molecules were believed to arise gradually on pre-existing non-organic replication platforms of silicate crystals in solution. In 2007, Carr and his colleagues reported that crystals of potassium hydrogen phthalate can act as a source of transferable information. That is, the little changes in the crystal can then go to subsequent crystals. And this is what everybody's getting excited about, that crystals will somehow put things together in an order and produce structure. Well, Carr kind of gave up on the idea when he finally conceded that the transfer of information from one generation to the next really wasn't occurring in a faithful way.
Yeah, that's why no one is currently suggesting that genetic material originated because of crystals. But the thing is, we have other ways that we can get RNA, and RNA is probably the original genetic material for life on Earth. Now, Luca probably had DNA, so we have a evolutionary history from before Luca. Because remember, Luca is not, last universal common ancestor, not the first organism. There were organisms before Luca that existed that are ancestral to you, and organisms that existed that are not, and then went extinct. And the earliest organisms probably had RNA. And RNA is something that if you have the right chemicals, you can generate spontaneously. And the thing is that when you have that, some of those RNAs will be able to reproduce. Now, the most basic form of their reproduction is where they make a conjugate. So, RNA has nucleotides like DNA, except instead of uracil, it uses what's the one that starts with a T? Not a T. No, it uses the U instead. It uses uracil instead of the one that's a T in DNA. Sorry. So DNA uses A, C, T, and G. RNA uses A, C, U, and G. Okay, great. So a conjugate pair, right? It's where you line up the nucleotides on the other side, so you get the other side of the RNA strand. And then that can then go on and make its own conjugate pair, and you get back to the original. But certain arrangements of RNA can form more complex shapes, which can then facilitate enzymes, which can then accelerate the rate at which the RNAs can reproduce, if they have the available chemicals to produce more RNA. And these amino acids that are used to form these sort of like proto-proteins need to have a relative enrichment of one-handed amino acids. And this is how we're getting that. The quote-unquote information, the heritable stuff, is on the RNA. That's why this idea that the crystals are giving us our heritable information isn't current. And it's also not why they're still being talked about in terms of origin of life research.
Today we have people in the intelligent design movement. I know we can get a little upset with them at times because they don't want to commit to who the creator is.
They've kind of come out and stopped doing that for the most part. Like, the Discovery Institute is not really out there anymore saying, like, well, maybe it's aliens, I don't know. Like, no, they're all Christians. They get all their funding from Christians.
They're just, creationists.
Yeah, they might not all be young Earth creationists. In fact, I know that they're not all young Earth creationists, but they're all Christian creationists. Like, the farthest you get from regular mainstream Christianity is, like, I think one of the DI guys is a Mooney. So he's a member of the Reunification Church from South Korea. Yeah. In case you're wondering, the Reunification Church is probably most famous for their mass weddings, in which thousands of people will be matched with a person of the opposite sex without their choosing, right? It's like names out of a hat, basically. And then there will be a mass marriage ceremony in which thousands of couples, usually in like a stadium or something, will all get married on that day. And they also have a very, very low divorce rate, but that's more because of, like, cultural pressure and the dangers of leaving the group. Not in terms of, like, your health and welfare, but just in terms of, like if you're leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses, you don't get to always keep all those contacts. Also, interestingly enough, the founder's original wife, the founder is Sun Myung Moon, which is why they're called the Moonies. But his original wife was supposed to be, like, a semi-divine being in her own right, and they were, like, destined from before time to be together, and then they got a divorce. And they had to change up all the theology about her. Yeah, like, oops. And also, if I remember correctly, the guy's sons have left the religion and have nothing good to say about him. He's now dead, as far as I know. But, yeah. Anyway, enough about the Moonies.
But I think they've at least given us some ideas that we can use. William Dembski, in particular, has come up with something he calls the explanatory filter. And we can apply that when we look at biological systems or things in nature. Basically, he says you have three possibilities for explaining a complexity and order that you see in nature. First, does chance explain it? If chance explains it, then you would expect it to be statistically probable.
No, statistically improbable things happen all the time. This is very dumb. I'm going to take a drink. Okay. Janti, have you ever seen a rock?
Yep.
Okay. I figured you had. Now, are you aware that rocks are in fact made of molecules? And are you aware that molecules are made of atoms and such?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, did you know that all of the atoms in a given rock are arranged in a particular geometric pattern that is unique to that one rock.
Kind of one of the ways we tell them apart.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
can you even fathom how incredibly unlikely it is to find that arrangement of those atoms in that specific geometric pattern that you find in each rock uniquely in the entire universe? Fantastically unlikely. But the system has to take a shape.
Hey, Kip.
Dogs. Hey, Kip. All right, so here's another example that let's say I shuffle 10 decks. Oh my goodness, there's so much barking. Let's say I shuffle 10. Oh, Jonathan Wells is the Mooney. Yeah, okay.
No, Kip said the explanatory filter is what Gavin Ortlund uses to excuse a Jedi's genocide in the Old Testament conquest narrative.
Nice. All right, so here's another example. When you shuffle a deck of 52 cards, right, the chance of you getting that particular arrangement of cards, if it's a fair shuffle, is 52 factorial, which is 52 times 51 times 50.
Mm-hmm.
It's big enough that I can't realistically explain that number to you. Now, let's say you did 10 decks all put together, right? So now you have 520 factorial chance of this, right? Because you're shuffling 10 decks together. But here's the thing. You will get a shuffle. There will be an order that those cards arrive in. And any order that you get will be fantastically unlikely. So is it statistically probable that I shuffled the particular shuffle that I got when I took 10 decks together and thoroughly shuffled them? Of course not. But you know what the chances of me getting a state for that deck is? It's 1. So you cannot simply say, is this outcome statistically probable, in order to determine whether or not it is the result of probabilistic causes. It doesn't work that way. The system has to take a state. Now, if you have a specific state in mind from before the system took that state, then you can start to talk about statistical probabilities, right? So for instance, if I said, okay, I'm going to shuffle these 10 decks and I'm going to get them in this particular order, well, now we have something to talk about, but we don't know how that works for life because we don't know what the prior probabilities are. We don't know how likely it is overall. We don't know how many times it's occurred. All we know is that at least once life originated, and all of us here, unless you're an AI watching this or something, are a result of that. Although even if you are an AI, ultimately you were created by something that is the result of the origin of life. So I guess even then, you're still a result of this.
Also, yeah, Landon Knoll put in the factorial in the chat. Is big.
It is a very big number. Yeah. Yeah, that is indeed.
That it stands a good chance of happening statistically. If you're going to attribute it to chance, you need that. The second possibility is, does design explain it? How do you know if design explains it? He says...
Well, there's actually a few interesting ways. One of which is if the state of the system is contrary to the pattern of the system that's known when it's left alone. So an example for this might be like the carvings at Mount Rushmore, right? We know how rock erodes, and it has natural cleavage planes that are the result of variations in the crystals that make up the rock, unconformities between rock layers, things like that, right? And so we know that natural erosion erodes along these cleavage planes, and then rocks flake off and fall off along those same cleavage planes. But we also know that the missing parts of rock in, say, the sculptures at Mount Rushmore do not follow these natural fault lines in the rock, which means that they cannot be a result of any known natural weathering process, which leaves non-weathering processes, which would include things like people putting in dynamite, which is how most of that carving was done. So, yeah.
Is it specified? Is it locked into a particular specification?
That doesn't mean anything on its own. You would have to do a whole lot more work to make that a meaningful question. Because you might say, well, is hemoglobin specified, to go back to an earlier example? I mean, I guess kind of, but not all organisms need as specific an oxygen transport protein, because not all organisms actually need as much oxygen transport, so they can have less specificity. And then as you grow bigger, you need a more efficient oxygen transport mechanism, allowing you to, or requiring you to evolve more and more specific oxygen transport. But that just means that the specificity needed for various important proteins is on a gradient between organisms that only kind of need it down to organisms that don't really need it, and then in the opposite direction, all the way to ones that need highly efficient versions. But fortunately, we've got a whole lot of time in which organisms start out not needing oxygen, then growing to need oxygen over time, allowing the evolution of very specified oxygen transport proteins. So looking around at Earth now, billions of years after evolution started, and saying, look how specific all these functions are, doesn't really mean anything. Because we don't know that those, in fact, in many cases, we know that those functions did not need to be that specific or well-tuned in the past. Because those functions weren't as important to many organisms in the past, and they're not that important to organisms now. Like sponges, which are an animal, barely need oxygen. They can survive in very low oxygen environments. And they don't really need like hyper-efficient oxygen transports because they barely rely on oxygen in the first place.
And third, possibly, does a law of nature explain it? If that's true, it'll be repeatable. It'll just happen again and again as a law of nature.
Now, that is true, but I want to point out how that interacts with the probabilistic aspects of nature, right? So, I think everyone probably knows that a pendulum, right, that is perfectly predictable according to the laws of physics. If, in a simple case, if we ignore friction, and you know the length of the pendulum lever, you know the height of which it's being raised on one side, and you know like the force of gravity that is under, you can calculate how fast it will swing and what the periodicity of its swing is, and you can calculate where in that swing it will be at any arbitrary point in the future, right? It's 100% calculable. But what happens if you add another lever at the end of that pendulum and then hang another weight from it? Can you come up with an equation that will tell you the state of that pendulum at any arbitrary point in the future? Do you happen to know that one?
I don't.
The answer is actually no, you can't. There is no general equation that will predict the future state of that pendulum arbitrarily far into the future. And we just got 5 gifted memberships. Thank you so much. Those were gifted by Joshua Geese, and they went to... let's see, Tesla Ranger, David Taylor, Vagary, My Unfinished Journey, and Triceratops Strawberry Polyploidy Forever. By the way, that Vagary is Vagary, Vagrant, Vagabond of Varying Vistas. We will take 5 drinks. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the reason I bring up the 2 pendulum, or the multi-pendulum idea, is it's connected to the same thing that the 3-body problem, if you've heard of that, right? There is no general equation that will allow a system of more than 2 gravitationally bound bodies to be predicted in their locations in the indefinite future. And I mean any 2. There are specific equations for known, very tightly constrained arrangements of matter that you can use indefinitely, but there's no general solution to the 3-body problem. Because every once in a while I have people coming at me like, there are solutions to the 3-body problem. Yeah, not general solutions, my guy, though. That's the thing. There's no general solution, which is what the problem is. Anyway, what this means is that the laws of physics, which are eminently predictable in simple cases, ultimately do not really help us with our indefinite prognostications about the future when there are too many variables. And remember, when we go from 1 pendulum to 2, we're only introducing a few new variables, right? We're introducing 1 new lever arm. We're introducing how high it's initially lifted to, and a variable position for where the lever arm actually attaches. That's it. That's all we're doing. And yet suddenly we cannot come up with a general equation that will predict the future behavior of that lever. It just doesn't happen. And we can't even do it for the first lever either, because it will also have its swing disrupted by what the goings-on of the lower lever. And that's how simple a case it is, where it stops being perfectly replicable. Now, if you could guarantee that you had absolutely every single aspect of the starting conditions 100% identical, down to like the atomic level, then yes, you could repeat the exact same experiment with those chaotic conditions and it would keep going. But that's one of the problems. Life has so many complex starting conditions, and so do mutations and everything about biology, that even though every aspect of biology and abiogenesis and everything like that is in fact governed by natural laws, it does not allow us to perfectly predict outcomes, because there are too many factors, and too many of them are either impossible to know or so difficult to know as to be impractical to account for. So it is not simply the case that if there were laws governing evolution, therefore evolution would just be perfectly replicable. That's not how it works. We're going to take a quick break, everybody. I'm going to get myself a fresh drink, as well as heat up the last little bit of this coffee, because it's now the worst temperature. That temperature that Luke invented. I hate that guy. I will spit it out of my mouth because it is lukewarm. I'm now Jesus from Revelation. Take that, coffee.
Oh.
Anyway, we'll be back in a little bit, now that I've gotten my biblical illusion bug out of my system. See you in a few minutes, everybody. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members. Hey there, everybody. We do need to take a Dapper as a professional drink, because I did, in fact, accidentally put the end credits on instead of the intermission video. For just a little bit, but it did happen, so here's that. Ooh, I might have put that in the microwave a little bit too long. That was a little painful. Ooh, but I also have this thing. It's an orange juice and vodka. It's very fancy. I think I invented it. I call it an Orvodjuska, and yes, that's a reference to The Office.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Orvodjuska. Very, very good.
Okay.
Let's look at these things. First, does chance explain our observations? We might ask, can we distinguish chance from design?
In some cases, yes. Old man writer of the Irish textbook for $5 says, I think Netflix will actually be solving the three-body problem next season. They're recasting Richard's bag with AIG way cheaper. Take a drink. Yeah, actually, the impossibility of a general solution to the three-body problem is, in fact, a major plot point in the Netflix show Three-Body Problem, which is itself based on the book of the same name by Xixin Liu, a Chinese author who wrote what is one of the best-selling sci-fi trilogies currently out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a drink, and it was a little bit smaller so as to not burn my mouth. That was really, really,
You're
really
gonna give
hot.
yourself fur tongue.
I think it's a little bit late for that.
Hmm.
I also oversteeped my black tea the other day, and it was a little bit too astringent. And I was like,
Ugh. Ugh.
yeah.
Oversteeped tea is disgusting. Like, there's a piece of my soul that dies when I see people that just leave the bag in the whole time while they're drinking tea, and I'm like, okay, if you want to drink something that tastes like battery acid, be my guest. But
Well, I didn't do that. It was only a little bit oversteeped. I think I only oversteeped it for like, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds or something. But it just a little over, and the astringency started to
it
kick
makes a
in.
difference.
It does.
Those
It does.
tannins, they'll get you.
I'm not disagreeing.
Well, let's define our words. I checked the dictionary. Chance is described as the absence of any known reason why an event should turn out one way rather than another.
Okay, but that's only one definition, right? I don't know if you know this, but dictionaries usually give you more than one definition because words are used in multiple ways. What I would prefer to say in this particular context is that what we mean by chance are processes whose outcome cannot be known from the outset. Not that there's no known mechanism, right? Because we know of various mechanisms for things that we call chance, right? Like, for instance, when we say that mutations are random or chance-based or probabilistic, what we mean is we don't have an effective way to predict which mutations will occur in which cell at what time, right? And we don't have a way to do that. But that doesn't mean we don't understand the physical mechanisms behind mutations, right? Like, we know the physical causes of point mutations, of substitutions, of deletions, of gene duplication, things like that, right? We know physical causes for these things. Does that mean it's not chance? Well, I would argue no, because we cannot predict when those things will occur in which cells when. Therefore, it is chance-based. And this particular definition of chance removes from the category of chance most of the things that most people think of as being chance-based. Now, there might be some things in science that are truly chance-based in this sense, right? Like, it seems like particle physics really is chance-based, even under this set of circumstances, right? Where there's no underlying variable that deterministically determines the outcome of experiments in quantum mechanics, right? It seems to be the case. But that's not what's true for mutations, but that doesn't make them non-chance-based. In fact, if you have early access to my videos, you may have already seen my series on Sabur Ahmed and the Muslim Lantern. And this is a similar argument that they tried to make, right? They tried to essentially define out of existence chance, and then therefore say that, see, all these silly Darwinists rely on chance, but they don't actually have any chance because mutations aren't chance-based, because they have physical causes, which, no, that's not what we mean. No one is saying that mutations don't have a physical cause that is determinable. Kerry Bronson for $5 says, rule of thumb, if your definition of chance or randomness would poorly apply to a game of craps, it's a misleading definition. Yeah, that's actually a really good way to put it. I wish I had thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this definition of chance means that games of chance, as defined by law, like craps, slot machines,
Roulette,
not actually games of chance, because we have a known reason why an event should occur. Okay, great. That seems like a kind of useless definition for a lot of cases.
Synonyms are fortune, fate, and luck. Design? Well, no
I
wonder
love
the
cinnamons.
I want a synonym roll.
I want a cinnamon roll.
evolutionists hate the word design.
No, they don't. I'm ignoring the whole evolutionist bit. But look, people who accept science use the word design all the time, both in regards to things that are actually designed and in terms of things that aren't, but we're talking about them as if they were because it's easy to say, right? It's easier to say a wing is designed for flying than it is to say that wings are the result of the pressures involved in needing to be volant among certain organisms with pre-adapted
Or you could just say they
organs that could have been
developed for
accepted.
flying.
Right. Like, if you want to get into the we're not going to make any kind of anthropomorphizations option, it just becomes harder to talk, right? Like, sometimes if you look up at the sky and you say, oh, those clouds look threatening, because you think that there's a storm coming and those look like storm clouds, no one actually thinks that what you mean is that the cloud is looking at you and, like, trying to roll an intimidation check in D&D. Like, no one thinks that's what's happening. Right? Humans are allowed to anthropomorphize things without needing to actually impute literal personhood onto the things that they anthropomorphize.
No wonder you can't teach intelligent design in our public schools. Look at the definition from the
We don't
American
teach
College
intelligent
Dictionary.
design because it's religion. We don't teach people like your specific theology in school.
Yep.
That's not what you teach in science class.
Yeah, science class is for science, and this isn't science.
Like, if you want to learn about theology, you could go to seminary, or you could be a religious studies major. Like, why are you teaching that in a public school classroom?
Look,
Why?
I went to a Catholic high school, and while we did have a theology class, you know how much stuff from the theology class came up in my biology classes? Yeah, exactly, literally none. In fact, my biology teacher wasn't a Catholic. He was just teaching at that school.
I remember my high school biology teacher, I was going, I don't remember why I happened to be looking at her bookshelf, but she had like a bookshelf of like really cool science books in her classroom, and I found a young Earth creationist textbook or like booklet or something on her shelf, and it was talking about like apes and man or whatever, and I said, hey, look what you have, this is great, can we talk about it? And she was like, get that out of here, I don't want it. So apparently, I guess someone had snuck that onto her bookshelf. She was not happy. And no, she did not want to talk about that crap in her class.
Yeah, I don't blame her. Yeah, actually, my Catholic high school was not a young Earth creationist high school. And I don't know if my parents knew that, because they were young Earth creationists when they sent me there. But, whatever.
Design means to plan and fashion artistically or skillfully. To
Does it
intend
require
for
artistic, or some people plan and fashion things and they are not artistically, and they are not done skillfully.
You know what? I will say, if you have like a kid with a stick who wants to do like a play sword fighting, and he just strips off the extra branches from that stick, I would call that design. I wouldn't call it artistic or skillful, but I would call it design. Although he does give two more definitions, so intended for a definite purpose. That's one I really like. It's intended.
Yeah, that's
like,
a good one.
I might change to like something which has been modified for a definite purpose, has been designed.
a definite purpose, to form or conceive in the mind, to contrive, to plan. I suspect that's how you got to the museum, how you got involved with this conference. You made some plans and came here? Imagine if you would have just left it up to the evolutionary process of chance. You just sort of sit and vibrate in place and see what happens. No, you.
What?
Vibrate, like, by vibrate in places, he just mean not have, like, absolute zero temperature? Is that just what he means? Does it exist?
I guess. I mean, because I know he's not talking about like spirit science stuff, like, oh, we all vibrate at a different frequency. But why would people leave it up to the evolutionary processes when they're trying to figure out whether or not they're going to a museum?
Yeah, I don't know.
How are those things related at all?
No, they're not. And the thing is, while behaviors in organisms are at least somewhat contingent on their evolution, those actual behaviors in an individual are not an example of evolution, right? Now, I'm not here advocating
That's dumb, I'm putting in a key.
Oh, yeah, you know what? We'll take a key. I'll take a drink for that. So, I am not here endorsing, like, the whole of evolutionary psychology. However, there is no question that the evolution of organisms influences their behavior. It's just that evolutionary psychologists, while they're right that that's a factor in your behavior, are wrong that it's always the determining factor, and they also usually just make things up on the basis of what they imagine your evolutionary history to be like.
No,
I don't
I
either.
really don't.
I don't either. However, the basic idea that evolution affects behavior is true, right? There's a reason that eagles don't act just like humans, and that has to do with their evolution. However, that being said, your decision to go to a museum is not an evolutionary process. It is a process that happens in a single organism's brain. Single organisms do not undergo evolution. That is not how it works. And yes, I know that you could argue that cancer is an exception to that rule. Okay, great. Your cancer isn't deciding to go to the museum.
Made specific plans.
I've heard people make a lot of arguments. It doesn't mean they're good arguments.
Rosina Apophenia Supper Keller for $1.99 says, vibrating in place is always a good time with a peach emoji. You know what? I'm not going to argue either way on that one. You have as much fun as you want vibrating in place. Enjoy.
plans, how you were going to get here, when you were going to leave, how long it was going to take, where you were going to stay, the whole thing. Well, let's look at a couple of rocks, see if we can tell whether they're designed or whether the result of chance. Here's a couple.
All right, everybody.
Again, are rocks alive? Do they have baby rocks?
But some rocks
Do
could
they
be
perform
designed.
respiration? Do they have metabolism? What's going on?
To be fair, rocks could be designed, right? Like we grow
Some
like
of them are
diamonds in
by
labs.
humans.
Yep. All right, let's see, everybody. You guys get to say whether you think these rocks are designed or not.
Rocks. What do you think? Either one of them look like they might be a beneficiary of any design. They both have a point at one end.
They've been modified
Kind of.
by humans.
Yeah, so here's the thing. The one on the right is clearly an arrowhead. We know that for a few reasons. One is rocks that we watch weather naturally. First, don't tend to weather into points, right?
Mm.
Second, they tend not to gain extra notches because it tends not to be how the natural weak points in rocks go. And further, we've seen humans make products like the one on the right at the very least. I suspect the one on the left too, but it's also been broken apart, so it's harder to say. At the very least, the one on the right, yes, that is something that was designed by humans because we know how natural processes weather rocks, and they don't do it this way. So we have positive evidence of design and negative evidence against natural processes. But that doesn't carry over into biology. Carrie Bronson for $2 says, cancer making decisions resulted in 4chan. You know, I can't really disagree.
Even 4chan acknowledges it.
Yeah, it's
Also,
true.
I like what Robert Adsit said, that sand is fetal rock.
You know, it is so hard for me to like make an assessment of 4chan because on the one hand, it is a cesspool of some of the worst things that have ever existed. On the other hand, they have a documented history of catching predators and getting them sent to prison, which, what am I going to say? That's a bad thing? No, it's absolutely not a bad thing.
Also, for many years, I hung out on the comics board because people, would post fan art or have challenges or share like scans and things before like digital comics really took off. So
4chan is a complicated place, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It has some of the worst
it is
things
a
that
torrent
imaginable.
of chaos.
Yeah, that's
you just spin a
probably it.
wheel and it comes out to either trolling, something that's positive for humanity, or just utter baffling nonsense.
I gotta also say that the resources that they marshaled to keep track of Shia LaBeouf's flag during the whole flag scavenger hunt was absolutely amazing. He put up a flag in a farm in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest, and these guys...
geolocated it.
Yeah, they used like visible planes in the sky and correlated that to like flight tracking software, and they were able to triangulate it so that they could go steal the flag, and I'm just like... It frankly amazing.
It represents the ultimate potential of humanity for either good or evil.
Yeah, it's like science, right? Like, sure, you could use atomic energy to solve the climate crisis, or you could blow people up with it. You know, and the answer from 4chan that we get is a lot of the time people want to blow each other up. It's a lot of what happens.
Sometimes,
yeah,
they just want to shitpost.
Yep.
Flat at the other. One's a little more symmetrical than the other. Is symmetry an indication of design?
No, not always. There are processes that cause symmetry without design. You just showed a whole bunch of them there, David, right? You showed snowflakes. Snowflakes are not designed, by and large. There is a guy out there who does like design snowflakes for photography thing, and he's like the only person out there who does it. I don't remember his name, but like you can find him. You can find a little mini documentaries about him on YouTube, right? But by and large, no, snowflakes aren't designed. Yet they have axes of symmetry. Is the symmetry perfect? No, but it's also not perfect on that arrowhead. So no, symmetry on its own is not an indication of design.
Well, how would we tell which of those is designed? Let's look at a bigger piece of rock. You look up on this mountain, you'll see that erosion has caused fissures, ice has broken cracks in it, the just general
Are we
weathering.
about to get pareidolia?
No, this is Mount Rushmore before the carvings. He's going to compare this to Mount Rushmore.
Oh yeah, I can see that. Sorry, my screen was a little tiny. Now
Yeah.
I recognize it. I had to make it bigger.
Yeah. So basically, this is exactly what I've been talking about. Here we have a mountain face where we know that this is natural erosion because it follows the patterns of natural erosion. We can detect this. So in order to make this work for biology, he's going to have to show a way in which evolution does not proceed according to known natural causes, which, good luck to him. Because I don't know if you know this, but mutation and selection are both observed natural processes.
phenomena has put
It
more wrinkles in
really-
that rock than
Ruined that mountain face, like, honestly. It's one of the places in the Black Hills. It's just stunningly gorgeous, and they put a bunch of white dude faces on it.
Mm-hmm.
Some of whom killed the, ancestors of the people who revered that mountain. So, good job, America.
I mean, that's pretty typical for America.
I've got on my face here. When I was up in Canada, some fellow come up to me afterwards and he says, you mentioned you were 75. He says, you didn't look 75 to me. But now that I see you up close, you look 75 all right. I told him I was just about the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me.
That was a joke that did
Total
land.
Monet.
That was a joke that did land, so we don't drink for it.
This is an interesting mountain. 15 years after this picture was taken, random weathering and what have you did this to it.
No, you dork. Random weathering didn't do that. It's not funny. Oh my god, I hate this.
Yeah, and in fact, we know that it wasn't random weathering for two big reasons. One, we have a historical record of how this happened, and it wasn't random weathering, as you might be shocked to know. And two, because again, you can tell the difference between natural processes and actual design instances, because the design tends to go against the natural processes. So in order for this to work for evolution, you need to find ways in which evolution goes counter to natural processes. But all the processes involved in evolution are both observed and known to be natural, right? Mutation is an observed natural phenomenon. Natural selection, sexual selection, observed natural phenomena. Genetic drift is just the outworking of math in terms of population genetics. That's sure as heck natural. What about evolution counters this in order to say that it's impossible for organisms to be not designed? Because what we see in organisms is perfectly explicable as the outcome of billions of years of mutation, selection, and drift. So there's no problem here in terms of design. You can't simply look at this and say, well, because it looks like a face, it was designed, and because humans have a face, they were designed. There are other rock formations that have been thought to look like faces that weren't designed. Like, remember the old man on the mountain from New Hampshire? No longer there, but it was known for at least centuries as the old man of the mountain because it looked like a face. In fact, it was probably millennia, because when white settlers got there, the native people there were already revering it as the face of some ancestor or something like that. Which means that those stories themselves probably went back long before the European colonizers got there. Because chances are that story didn't develop. Chances are that what didn't happen is that story developed, and then like a year later, some guy named Joe showed up and was like, hey, what's with that face? Probably not what happened. Maybe it did.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's possible. Seems unlikely.
Now, I got a question for you. Let's say you drifted in from another planet. Okay, you don't know anything about presidents. You don't know anything about people. You know a little bit about the natural geology of the planet, but nothing about the biology, and you look up and you see that. Could you tell that was intelligently designed as opposed to the product of weathering, erosion, just...
Yes, you could.
Yeah.
Natural-
You could tell that.
processes?
Like, not
You
only is there a gigantic pile of rubble right there in the foreground from where people chipped off pieces and they just fell straight down, you can see the weathering doesn't match the carving, and there's tool marks, and this is so dumb.
Actually could. You could crawl up on the nose, for example, of one of the presidents there, and you would notice
You
that
go
whereas
into the
normally...
secret library.
I love how he's now just telling us the exact thing I was saying. Okay, thanks. I'll take a drink for correct prediction, I guess.
The fissures and cracks in the rocks follow natural cleavage planes. In this case, the shape of that protruding, what we now know as a nose, people have drilled across with drills and forced the fracture plane to go in planes that are not what you would get if you just left it up to chance. In other words, we have forced the fracture planes, basically a carving process that goes across natural cleavage planes.
Across.
Hey, look at these things that were designed. Therefore, evolution can't happen. Wow.
Yeah, ultimately, this argument is starting to seem like it's just some things are designed, therefore everything is designed, which is not a valid argument. Also, he said a crossed with a T at the end. That bugs me.
Well, it's his regional dialect. He's also said,
I
like,
know.
run up. That's a southernism.
I know, it still bugs me. And
Because
no,
I grew
that's
up with
not
people
fair.
who still to this day will use a crossed.
Yeah, it still bugs me.
She run up on me from across the way. Yeah.
That's kind of one of the ways we can tell chance from design. What about the basic job of making proteins? That's one of the things we do in our body. We make 100,000 different proteins.
Do we do it consciously?
Yeah, is there a mind directing each of those proteins? Because there doesn't seem to be.
Not 100,000 total proteins. Our body has 100,000 different proteins. By the way, when I was in graduate school, there was an old axiom.
Also, I'm pretty sure that's wrong, because I'm pretty sure there are only about 20,000 genes in the human genome, which means that you can't really have 100,000 proteins, because you would need about a gene per. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's wrong. Yeah. Do you know how many genes there are? Because I'm struggling to remember.
You know I don't. I'm not a
Yeah, I
freaking
double
expert on
checked.
biology.
Yeah, it's about 20,000. So, yeah, no. I'm pretty sure it's not 100,000 genes.
Oops.
Sorry, 100,000 proteins. Because, there's an order of magnitude fewer genes that exist than that. And, yeah. Donald Hermino for $2 says, if you're bothered by regionalisms, run WOFF. I'm not sure what that acronym is. It's also not regional. It's also not just any regional dialectical difference. There are certain ones that for some reason just scratch against my brain, and it's probably
Run a Wheel of Fortune show.
Oh, Wheel of Fortune show?
Oh yeah, by the way, Pat Sajak retired after 40 years on the show.
Well, congratulations to Pat.
Not a host anymore, yeah.
I hope the next host is just as good. Probably won't be, though.
They probably won't be. We learned this lesson with Jeopardy.
Yeah, we did. No one's ever gonna.
Should have been the pick. I'm just saying.
He really should have.
Yeah.
But then again, I think that about most things that don't have LeVar Burton in them. Like, this should probably have LeVar Burton in it. Like, when is LeVar Burton a bad addition to a show or a movie?
Usually never.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen it. Except for that Star Trek.
One gene, one protein. Back then, it was all lockstep. We would have a gene for each protein.
No, it is more complex than that. Proteins can combine with other proteins to form more complex proteins. But I don't think we're going up by an order of magnitude.
Protein. So with 100,000 proteins, you'd have at least 100,000 genes that would code for these proteins. How many genes they come up with when they finally did the sequencing? Well, they were
about 20,000.
We're all over the place.
Not 100,000.
25,000. Pretty well does it. Wow, these genes must be doing
No, it's less than
Okay,
25,000.
it's closer, but still.
Yeah.
some double duty someplace. It depends on where the reading frame starts or whatever to produce 100,000 different proteins.
Probably not that
proteins
great
are
at, Price is Right.
Oh, I forgot another mechanism by which a gene can make more than one protein. There's also the option where, so in eukaryotes, right, a gene is composed of two components, introns and exons. Introns are the parts that actually are translated in the ribosomes and turned into protein. Exons are bits that are snipped out. But the thing is, there are some genes where certain introns can also be snipped out to make a shorter, different product, which can then go on to have a different function. So there is that. But still, what this would mean is that on average, each gene has about 4 different proteins that it's involved in making. I don't think he has the evidence for that.
Mm.
made up of amino acids, and there's 20 different ones that are used. I'll ignore the fact that there are left and right-handed versions. They're all left-handed we work with.
Actually, there's a few more that a few bacteria use, but humans use 20, and almost all living things use 20, so sure.
So the letters A through T could represent 20 different amino acids. I won't use their real name because it kind of breaks your tongue in two just to pronounce them.
Okay, just like chemical symbols, every protein has a amino acids has a 2 little letter symbol that you can use to code protein sequences, or amino acid sequences into proteins. You could just use those. Just saying, like that's a thing you could do.
Too hard.
Think of the amino acids forming a chain like these beads people wear nowadays that have little messages with different color beads and letters. So A through T would be the full complement of amino acids.
Recorded?
About a decade ago.
Only 10 years ago. Oh my god.
Actually, I think it was closer to 9 years ago.
Message bracelets with
But,
like
the
letter beads back
2000s?
in like elementary school. So
Yeah, it was like the 90s and 2000s, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
Look, David Menton was already pretty old 10 years ago. So, he's not exactly with it. In fact, they changed what it is, and now he's not with it anymore.
It'll
happen to you too. The Simpsons.
Acids that we use to make our 100,000 different proteins. How big is an average protein? 400 to 500 amino acids long.
That's about right. That's not too far off. We'll take it. Take a drink.
Be the size of the average protein. So here's an interesting question. I've shown what 500 dots would look like in a row. If we started with an infinite supply of A through T amino acids, and we could just put them in any which way we wanted, so at each position of these 500 dots, you could have any of those 20. My question is, how many
I'm with the chat that this is a big long ramp to big number therefore God.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We're taking a long time to get the big number therefore God.
proteins could you make that would differ by at least one amino acid? The answer is lots.
Well, I mean, it would be 500. It would be 20. 20 options for each one times the 500.
Yeah, but that's math.
Okay.
Lots that can do that.
No, sorry. It's 20 times 20. So yeah, it's 20 to the 500th power.
Let's take one of the proteins that's terribly important to us, hemoglobin.
Oh, hey, I was talking about that too. Look, it's a great example protein because almost everyone knows what it is and what it does. So that's why I think both myself and Menton use it as an example. Because, I mean, if you manage to get through high school, you probably know what hemoglobin is for.
Hemoglobin makes blood red. Hemoglobin binds oxygen. You know, if you think about it, our blood is warm,
Good job,
isn't it?
you got that right. We'll take
You ever drink warm water?
Yes.
If you drink water that's the temperature of your body, it tastes flat. Have you noticed that? We prefer cold water.
That's a cultural thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are places where people prefer hot water or warm water.
The reason we like the cold water is more oxygen dissolves in cold water. There's very little oxygen in warm water. Think of it. You have this warm, largely water going through your bloodstream that you expect to carry oxygen down to your big toe.
But
Dapper, help me out, because I think my brain just short-circuited. Is there less oxygen in hot water?
yes. He is right
Is it
about that.
because of, like, the steam?
So basically, water that's dissolved in oxygen. So there's not more oxygen in the sense of like the H2O, right? That molecule is going to stay
Okay,
the same.
that's what I was asking, because I was like, wait, that
Yeah.
doesn't sound right.
But oxygen is
Okay,
dissolved in
thanks.
liquid water, right? So what happens is when the steam, when the
oxygen
water
is
gets
dissolved
hotter,
in the water, like,
right.
this is why I was like, wait, that didn't sound right to me, and then I remembered, like, the carbonation process, like you... Anyway,
Yeah, same thing.
carry on.
If you heat up soda, it's going to get flat, right?
Mhm.
Because that's dissolved carbon dioxide. Oxygen is also dissolved in water. And the hotter the water is, the more likely it is to come out of solution. So on average, you have less
Yeah.
oxygen the hotter the water is.
My brain, for whatever reason, was like, but water's H2O, how do you have less oxygen?
Yeah,
And
no, I get
when
it.
you
Yeah.
said it, oh, yes, this all, I was like,
He's not quite that crazy. he's not
okay,
getting the
good.
temperature. Yeah,
'Cause
okay.
I was like,
Yeah. Savage 1080 radiometric pixels Cobra for gifted 5 memberships, and they went to Science Nerd, Heather Cursorial, Angiosperms, Coon, Some Odd, Dragon Spartan 90 official, and Christopher Canadius. Here's
Nice.
one.
Excellent.
That finishes off my coffee, so now switching to the Orvajuska. 2,
Yeah, the chat's reminding me that, like,
3,
higher temp, faster molecules, the
4,
gas tends to get moved out. So,
and
yeah,
5.
for whatever reason, it just, when I heard it the first time, I'm like, so,
Yeah, no, it's...
little dirt moment there.
The thing is, it is true that there's more oxygen dissolved in cold water. However, the point of having hemoglobin is that the hemoglobin itself binds oxygen within its structure, and drinking cold water doesn't give you more or less hemoglobin. And the oxygen that the hemoglobin is binding to is primarily coming from your lungs, not your drinking water.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
well, I guess technically it's true that you'll get slightly more oxygen inside of you if you drink cold water.
I was gonna say, like, that's why we have gigantic lungs to take in all the air.
This is such a minuscule thing, and like, it's completely meaningless.
I mean, yeah, I was gonna say, like, if we lived in the water as aquatic creatures, then okay,
right,
sure,
then,
we would probably get most of our oxygen from the water, but no.
Yeah, this is a whole bunch of nonsense.
This is, this is painful.
It's one of those things where it's like, you're not technically wrong about this, Menton. There is more oxygen in cold water. It just doesn't matter. My Unfinished Journey for $6.66 says, "Hail Nero Caesar." Yes, of course, the number of Nero Caesar. Also, on an air-conditioned bus and a busy schedule couldn't keep me from the 3 times sharing and 5 times liking. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. And I'm sorry that the bus is unair-conditioned and that you have a busy schedule.
Brutal.
Yeah. Like,
the last time I was on an unair-conditioned bus, we made it like a couple blocks before the driver just pulled over, called like the central hub and was like, yeah, we need a new bus. Because everybody was just freaking miserable. It was summertime in Southern California. Yeah, we weren't about to deal with that.
No.
Plus, there were seniors on board, and that's like a super risk. So,
actually, just for some reason, last night like barely cooled off, despite the fact that this is a desert. And so, like, it was like 9 p.m. and it was still like 41 degrees out. It was ridiculous. Normally by 9, the temperature has gone down by like 8 or 9 degrees. But like today, it was just like, or yesterday, it was like, nope.
I will say that it's been very nice over the last few weeks that the marine layer has been hanging around because of like that temperature inversion thing, and it's kept the temperatures really cool. And I've been able to keep the windows open most of the time, and it's been getting down into like the low 60s at night, which is like perfect.
Savage 1080 radiometric pixel scoper for $5 says, "Humans like cold water because our ancestors were gilled fish. Menton et al. 20 something. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's where he's going. I doubt it, but all right. Let's get some more
aquatic ape theory confirmed.
Wow.
Well, you wouldn't get much down there.
Oh snap! My Unfinished Journey says that they're the bus driver. F.
Yeah, wrong.
Not for the fact that hemoglobin binds oxygen and gets down to that cell in the big toe, and then the cell tries to talk the hemoglobin.
Yeah, but David, I know I can't talk to you, and I know you can't watch this, but my guy, that oxygen is not coming from your drinking water. When someone has hypoxia, you don't give them a cold glass of water.
Yeah.
like what are we talking about here? Sean for $10 says, "Oxygen in the water gave me flashbacks to when I fell for Amway, and they had us selling water with extra oxygen in it, as if it was a magic potion." With facepalm and an attempt at a Godzilla. We'll take a drink for that Godzilla.
Amway was so predatory.
Are they gone now? I thought they were still in business.
No, they're not officially gone, but they are not what they used to be, thankfully.
Okay. Well, that is good, because what they used to be is pretty terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I'm not saying that all MLMs are pyramid schemes. I'm just saying that all of them have a money flow structure in which a large base supports a tiny little peak at the top by having the money go up and up and up and up. And the only way for people at higher rungs to make money is for people at lower down in the chain to buy into the whole thing.
Yeah,
not saying it's a pyramid scheme, though.
From recruits not selling whatever product they...
Yeah. I mean, technically, yes, when your downline sells things, you get a little bit of that money, but...
Which is allegedly, in my opinion... pyramid scheme, allegedly, in my opinion.
Hemoglobin out of it to turn it over, and that involves other enzymes, and it gets very complicated. But here's a red blood cell, and red blood cells are red because of hemoglobin. Iron has a reddish color, just as you see in mineral. How big of a protein is hemoglobin? Well, it's 539 amino acids long, so it's on the larger side.
Well, it's a key smash, so...
Yeah. Because remember, these are not actually the letters used for amino acids. So this is just Menton's crazy, I'm going to use the first 20 letters of the alphabet nonsense. Also, in a few places, he's got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, like over and over again. In fact, I think that's actually what's happening.
It's not like that. It doesn't go 1 through 20, 1 through 20, 1 through 20, 1 through 20. That's
It
nonsense.
does a few times, though. Yeah, but, I mean, hemoglobin certainly doesn't. But yeah, this does. So I would actually say that this is, in fact, designed because this is a bunch of alphabetic stuff in alphabetical order, which is not how proteins work. Gary Bronson for $5 says, MLMs are to pyramid schemes as master mold... Sorry. MLMs are to pyramid schemes as master mold is to Sentinels. I don't think I know the Sentinels reference. That might be a franchise.
Like X-Men Sentinels.
Oh, okay. X-Men Sentinels. Got it. I just haven't been keeping up with X-Men long enough, so it's like it's no longer at the forefront of my brain. Sorry. I haven't even been watching the new X-Men cartoon.
X-Men 97?
Yeah, I haven't been watching it.
We should watch
really
that.
Good. Okay.
Among all the other stuff that we...
Yeah, you
are
can't
supposed
just
to be
keep
watching.
saying we need to watch that, because then our list of things we have to watch just grows exponentially, and we never get through
It just means that we're never going to run out of stuff to watch.
Well, then you're going to have earlier start times to when we watch things together, because when you say at like 10 p.m., hey, you want to watch Dune Part 2? The answer is going to be no.
I did not say that at 10 p.m. It was like not even 8:30.
Still.
And here's an interesting question. If we were to start with the right proportions of all of the amino acids, in other words, the right numbers of A, B, C through T, and we were to just put them in a string like this, we might start just going A through T until we have to change it. How many different combinations would we have to put together before we stumbled upon?
Well, basically 20 to the, how many did you say, about 530? I'm just going to say he said it was 530 amino acids. I don't remember. So about 20 to the 530th power divided by 2. That is about how long you would expect, or that's about how many combinations you would have to expect before you would get to the one that is the one that he has specified. But remember, there are thousands of actual options that result in human hemoglobin. Further, there are other things that can allow for oxygen transport. Hemoglobin is not the only protein that does this. Other organisms have other chemicals like hemorythrin that use a different metal as their oxygen transport, which means that there are also thousands of options for that, which means we have to divide all these numbers by those. So, the actual chances of you getting an oxygen transporting protein are considerably less than 20 to the 530th divided by 2.
That combination, which is hemoglobin. Well, years ago, an atheist by the name of Isaac Asimov, of all people...
An atheist!
Ooh.
Of all people!
Yes.
Dun, dun, dun.
Wrote an article called Hemoglobin in the Universe, in which he did the math on this. If you started with the right proportions of all amino acids in our hemoglobin, then how many different ways could you put it together? He called it the hemoglobin number, and there it is. That's a big number. 4 times 10 to the 619th power. That's 4 with 619...
Big number, therefore God.
Mm-hmm. Guys, he did it. He got to big number, therefore God.
Did it.
Zeros after it. That's how many different ways you can put hemoglobin together if you start with the right proportions of all the amino acids. Man alive, how do you tackle a number like this? Let's look at 9.
Just don't.
Again, big number, therefore God. Why is this an argument?
Yeah, so the problem
Ridiculous.
is... All right, I'm going to take a drink because this entire argument is extremely stupid and I need to cool my brain off a little bit. Okay, so the problem with this whole argument, right, is that it is assuming a few things. One is it's assuming that life needs hemoglobin, right? Because remember, this whole thing is in the context of how do we get life from non-life. Well, here's the thing. Most organisms
do all creatures use hemoglobin?
No, in fact, many organisms
That's what I thought.
not only don't need oxygen, but die if they have too much oxygen in them. And so the earliest life forms didn't need oxygen, didn't have hemoglobin, didn't need it. And then when you get to the point where some life forms can start to use oxygen, they still don't need hemoglobin because they don't have big circulatory systems, right? Like an amoeba does need oxygen, right? If you can suffocate an amoeba. But do you think it has hemoglobin? No. It gets oxygen by diffusing it into its single cell from the environment. It doesn't need to transport it via a specialized transport protein. It's just getting in there. Sorry. And as we go up in complexity and size, then organisms start needing more and more complex transport mechanisms, and so they have to evolve more and more efficient proteins to transport oxygen, but they don't start that way. And second, as we know, as a result of there being more than one oxygen transport protein being used in life, there's more than one option in hemoglobin. And we also know that very unrelated organisms that still have hemoglobin have different hemoglobin. Like, did you know that plants have hemoglobin? They do, but it's not the same as animal hemoglobin. It's a different protein. We give it the same name because it does the same basic thing with the same basic chemistry, but it's not the same protein. And we've actually done experiments to see about how much of sequence space is functional. And it turns out that it's a significant fraction, which means that that's the overriding thing in terms of the chances. Oh, and also, let's see, Ben, Predictable Mutation Thick Tunicate, has gifted 5 Dapper Dinosaur memberships. Thank you so much. And those went to Todd Ferguson, Flurperment Supervisor, Trail Mix, Skulator, Over 9000, Maya Atkinson, and Alerted Bridge 97. Thank you so much. So, lost my train of thought a little bit. Oh, right, sequence space, right? So let's say, I'm going to take an analogy from Stephen Meyer, of all people, right? Stephen Meyer uses the same basic argument, but he uses the idea of a bike lock, right? So bike locks typically have 10 dials, each of which have 10 options for, 0 through 9, which means that the number of possible combinations on a bike lock is 10,000, right? Which means it should take you 500 tries on average, if you're trying random combinations and never repeating, to figure out a bike lock combination. But what's the key thing about that? It's that only one combination works, right? When we say only one combination works, which is how real bike locks work, then okay, great. But when I point out that the functional portion of the sequence space in this might be higher than 1, that changes the math. Let's say I tell you that of the 10,000 possible sequences, 1,000 of them will unlock the bike. Okay, well, how many options on average would you have to try now in order to unlock the bike lock? We went from needing, 5,000 options to now you only need 5. 5 is the average number of tries it would take to unlock that bike lock. And the thing is that we know that when it comes to amino acid space, much more than 1 over the number of amino acids in the sequence is fractional. Experimentally, it's been determined that it's much closer to like a few percentages than it is to just 1. That doesn't sound like much, right? But think about that. If the percentage of functional sequence space is 2%, it doesn't matter how long the sequence is. You only need, on average, to get only 2% of your chances will work, right? So on average, you only need 50 different tries to get the right number. And that is the fundamental problem that creationists always have with these calculations, is that they don't take into account the fact that the functional fraction of amino acid sequences is not 1 over the length of the sequence. It never is. I'll hit play.
One of the zeros, just the red part up there, 4 times 10 to the 9th. No clock has ever ticked that many times. Clocks haven't been around that long. They don't tick that fast. Every time...
I mean, clock can tick arbitrarily fast, but okay.
Every time you add a 0, remember the number gets 10 times bigger each time you add a 0? Mm-hmm. Let's add a bunch of them. How about 80 zeros? 4 times 10 to the 80th power. How big a number is that? Well, that's a number they throw around as probably the maximum number of atoms in the known universe. That would be a big number. Mm-hmm. And if we add 1 more 0, it would be 10 times the number of atoms estimated to exist in the known universe.
This is just high school math class. Why are we doing this? Mm-hmm. Like, I learned scientific notation in high school. I don't know about anyone else.
Well, we could keep going with this. One more batch of numbers, bear with me. 150 zeros. Boy, this is a huge number now.
Don't care.
This is called
5,000.
Yep.
Make a point.
The universal probability bound. Statisticians say that if the chance of something happening is worse than 1 out of that number, the opposite is a certainty.
Okay, let's take a drink because that's just a lie. When he says statisticians, what he means is creationists. They're the only ones I've ever heard talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is
so bad.
Things less likely than that happen all the time. you can come up with a fairly small number of cards that you would have to shuffle in order to get a deal that is just that unlikely. It's not that hard to do. Ben, Predictable Mutation, Thick Tunicate B2022, who's been a member for 14 months and is at the annual level, says, AIG are a tent of troublesome transphobic trouser trunks. Thank you very much. We'll take a drink for that. And yeah, every once in a while, I cover Answers News. And unlike Paul, I don't wait for Ken Ham to show up. So that's why I have a very different theme. In fact, actually, in order not to step on his toes, there's a fair chance that if Ken Ham does show up, I'm less likely to cover it. I'm like, I'll let Paul cover it. But anyway, almost every single time, one of two kinds of stories comes up, and I don't cover them. But one is, trans person does a thing, and AIG is angry. And the other one is, someone is arrested for doing criminal activity near an abortion clinic.
Yeah.
And they're on that guy's side.
Well, it's okay if they break the law.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, the last time it happened, there was a story about, like, this guy, like, broke onto the grounds of the clinic and started, like, messing around or something. And I'm like, this is just trespassing. Like, it's just trespassing.
Yeah, I mean, again, I went to school right down the street from the clinic that Eric Robert Rudolph bombed in Birmingham, and they had... You know what? I'm just not even going to tell that story. It's going to piss me off.
Okay.
It's going to piss me off. It's fine.
Basically, don't go there. You see, if you want to start playing games by invoking endless periods of time, you undermine the whole statistical
This is
foundation.
not a game.
No, and also,
Oh my god.
hemoglobin isn't
so
something
much.
that resulted from a collection of amino acids coming together randomly in a pond. Right? Like, that's not how this happened. No one is suggesting that. So giving us the chances of it happening doesn't make any sense, right? And in fact, I will use a non-living thing as an example, because in this case, it actually does work, right? If I told you, you know what the chances are of iron and carbon and tin and aluminum crystals forming themselves together into a functional car? It's this real big number. Okay, great.
Yeah.
But that's not how cars come about. And now, in this case, yeah,
Nope.
sure, they are designed, right? But there's a process that builds them that is not entirely chance-based. Some of it is chance-based, but not all of it. And that's what is also happening with hemoglobin. There are chance elements, but hemoglobin isn't the origin of a bunch of amino acids flying around at each other and just happening to connect in the right order. That's not how hemoglobin arose. I also want to point out that hemoglobin didn't need to arise in order for large, complex, oxygen-breathing organisms to evolve, because we know of multiple transport proteins.
Of modern science. Statistics means nothing anymore if you're willing to get out the numbers like this, one out of this. In fact, statisticians have given us specific warnings not to do this, so they call this the universal probability bound. I don't know how to communicate how big this number is. I guess the closest I can get is to tell you that the whole...
You already communicated it when you wrote 4 times 10 to the 619th. That was you communicating it. I swear, no one has less...
So bad.
No one thinks less of creationists than creationist speakers. They always assume the absolute worst about the level
Yeah,
of
they
intelligence
assume their
and knowledge of
audiences
their
are like
audience.
super dumb,
Yeah,
simple.
honestly, I would not dare to give this long-winded an explanation of just scientific notation, because I would be afraid of horribly insulting my entire audience. Unless it was an audience of like 12-year-olds or something, right? Like, it always baffles me just how dumb creationists think creationists are. Yeah, I don't. In fact, in the when AIG did their like internecine warfare papers about, well, we think these are young Earth creationists are actually young Earth evolutionists. One of the things that Harry F. Sanders, Emery Moina, talked about in one of the articles that was definitely written by him, even though they later decided to take his name off of it, was he was like, well, these people who are saying these things that I don't think is true, they might be confusing their audiences into believing in evolution because the audiences might not pick up on the nuances. I'm like, so you're just saying that the average young Earth creationist is dumb as a rock. Okay, interesting take there, professional, well, semi-professional young Earth creationist man. By the way, Emery Boyna, as far as I know, is now even off of Rumble. Apparently his takes were too spicy even for Rumble.
Wow.
Yeah, well, look. I start my interaction with Emery Moyna / Harry F. Sanders III started out pretty cordially because I just stumbled across him on YouTube and he was playing around with some genetic software. And that was cool. And then I covered him. I covered one of his videos, I think. I might have done two. I know I at least did one. No, I did at least two. But anyway, then I started paying attention to what he was saying on like his blog and like his Rumble. I was like, oh, this is the kind of person who's going to be on the news after a mass casualty event at like a synagogue or a black church or something. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So Sean for $5 says the game tree for Go is 10 to the 360th. I guess Go doesn't exist. Yeah, there's a great example, right? I should get good at Go. No one shouldn't. That'll take too long. I am not equipped to get good at Go.
That's the thing. I'm too competitive and I'm too much of like a perfectionist to not get good. And it'd be like, well, you'll see me in like 35 years.
Is that why we haven't played Scrabble again?
Number up there.
Yeah.
Is so big.
Yeah. I'm way too competitive and I hate not
American
winning.
National debt in.
And I especially hate not winning on things that are based on like intelligence and vocabulary. I'm just like, nah, my ego can't handle this.
Sorry. I'll throw the next game if you want.
At least I'm honest.
Dollars. That.
This number is bigger than the national debt. Oh my goodness.
How impressive. Now, what do we need?
I'll give him this. He at least knows his audience because that is one of the few audiences where that would land as a joke.
Need to make life. We're talking
Governments
about.
are bad at budgets.
I mean, that is true.
One
but
protein.
It's funny.
By the way, why would an atheist even do this?
I don't know.
Why would an atheist do this? I'm just thinking of the meme where it's like, what's the comedian's name? Where he like shoots the guy behind him, and he's just like, why would he do this? It's just like an atheist with big numbers shooting the guy behind him. It's like, why would an atheist do this?
And yeah, I don't actually know because I've never read this Asimov piece, but my guess is that he was talking about something about how extraordinary the universe is, and how cool life is, and how great it is to be alive. I don't know. That would be my guess. I'm probably not going to read it, because quite frankly, I don't care what Asimov has to say about hemoglobin. I like his robot stories. I'm a little bit disappointed that his Foundation series became part of his robot series late in the game. I like that he didn't have just one sci-fi universe. But then he introduced
Eric Andre,
robots.
thank you, Savage Cobra.
So yeah, that's my minor complaint. And also then he also tied in like his Nemesis story. And I'm just like, dude, not all of your stories need to actually be connected into the same universe. They clearly weren't originally intended this way. So I do have that minor complaint about Asimov. But Foundation was good. Go read the Foundation books, everybody. Yeah. Or listen to them on an audio program or something. I'm not sponsored, so I'm not going to tell you which one. Hey, Amazon, if you want to sponsor me, I'll totally tell people to go to your one. And listen to Asimov there.
We probably should start.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up things. All right, so Vishanti, what do you have coming up that you want people to know about?
Holy crap! This week is going to be very busy, which is delaying my YouTube video, my first real actual one. It's delaying it by a week because I kind of maybe overbooked myself, but that's okay. I've got the materials assembled, so I have one Patreon supporter at the moment. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you, Joshua Cheese. And he requested that I review Doctor Strange Volume 2, number 70. So that's going to be my first comic review. So that's kind of like a secondary topic that I do on my channel. So if you want to see that, just subscribe. It's fine. If you want to support me, it's patreon.com/baitvishanti, BEIT, Vishanti. And yeah, I'll have more tangible updates, but yeah, this week is a lot of non-YouTube related things that I'm going to be doing, so ask me in a week.
Okay. Well, I'm making sure to grab your Patreon link here so that we can make sure that it is in the description.
List affiliate link. Yeah.
But while we do that, I will say that what is coming up this week is on Tuesday, we're going to be having Kent with Bent. That will be, I don't know what number it is. I think it's 139, I want to say. I think. Not positive. So don't quote me on that. Let's see. Then we are going to be doing on. Let me actually check the calendar. So yeah, then on Wednesday over on Top Hats Off, I'm going to be doing Power Rangers Jungle Beasts, assuming people show up. Maybe they won't. Then on the Thursday, we are going to be premiering Pam Acker, Catholic Young Earth Creationist, Part 1. It is, in fact, going to be a 4-part series. So, yeah. Founding Catholic Young Earth Creationist who works for what's called the Colby Foundation, which is a Young Earth Creationist Catholic group. Michael Beverly, for 100 Mexican pesos, says, for some reason I couldn't remember, says, hey everyone, I'm talking to Dr. Jay Bundy tonight for all you Evolution Chat lovers, 7 p.m. Eastern, cheers. Thank you very much. So let's see. So that's Thursday. Then Friday, the 14th, is in fact my birthday, and we are doing a birthday stream starting at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and that will be going for hours. I have a video lined up to go over, and I'm basically just going to keep going until I can't keep going anymore. Everyone's invited. I'm going to be sending out the link to multiple people who are going to be able to drop in and out. Vishanti is one of the people I'm inviting. I'm inviting Chesh. I'm inviting Dr. Danster and Cardinal. I'm inviting Zach B. Hancock. I mean, like, basically, the people who've been on my channel, like, more than once or twice, are all getting invites.
Maddie,
and there will...
Jackson Wheat.
Well, I know that they are being invited, but I'm not sure that they'll be able to make it because they usually can't at that time on weekdays. So, Don't expect them, but they're welcome to show up if they can. I just don't expect them to be able to. Because, I'm not going until like midnight or anything. It's not going to be a 12-hour stream, I can guarantee. Because I don't have that in me. Sorry. But yeah, that'll be on Friday. And then Saturday there will not be a show on this channel. Because I will be done by the time Saturday comes around. So, alright, with that, everybody, thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you for hitting like. Thank you for sharing this video. Thank you for watching my videos. Thank you for all your super chats, all your gifted memberships, all your Patreon subscriptions, your memberships that you've joined yourself. Thank you for all that so much. I really appreciate it. If you're not currently supporting, check those things out. They're listed in the description. And so is Vishanti's Patreon and her wish list for Amazon, also in the description. I'll talk to y'all later. See ya hopefully on Tuesday, everybody. We're not doing Power Rangers. Bye. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Kent Hovind, Philravara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Eleron Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostek Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, Sphincter of Doom, Wallace, John Ackerman, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.